Welcome back to another episode of So You Want Your Kids to Be Good at Sport. I'm Ben Russell, Franchise Growth Manager for Mini Athletics. And once again, I'm joined by Nathan Tyson, who is our franchisee in Mini Athletics Nottingham and Loughborough, and Kirk Bowyer, our co-founder at Mini Athletics. How are we, gents? Are you okay?
Well, good, actually. Yeah. Very excited about this podcast.
Very excited. Yep, we're
again really excited. Really excited.
good. So, this is the podcast that is all about making the right moves as parents and as coaches to support our children to enjoy their sports and to make them have a positive experience in sport, so that one day they might go on to enjoy that sport enough to be great at it. But we're mainly focused on them
just be
getting
healthy
enjoyment.
and happy.
Be healthy and happy.
Yeah.
So we've got a sneak peek of the things to come from our guest here today. Before we introduce her, because Kirk's going to introduce our guest because he's very, very passionate about this subject. Physical literacy. Kirk, what do you know about it? And then over to you to introduce Natalie to us.
Well, I am going to deflect that, considering we have an expert in physical literacy on.
I wanted to put you on the spot, but he's not took the bait.
I fear that if I answer the question, we may be here for 40 minutes just with me talking. So I'd like to introduce you to Natalie Weir, who I've been following for some time on LinkedIn. And Natalie is currently doing a PhD. And Natalie, I have to read this off my screen here because I couldn't quite remember the full title. It's exploring the relationship between physical activity and physical literacy in the early years through a practical intervention development approach. Without further ado, welcome, Natalie.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Yeah, I was going to grill you on your PL definition if you were to give one, but yeah, that's fine. We'll go with it. I'll tell you much more.
So yeah, let's ask that first question. What is physical literacy?
Okay, so I think it's useful to give a little bit of background on me and why I'm suddenly doing a PhD. So I worked in sport development for 15, 16 years. For example, worked for 12 years for British Orienteering, the national governing body of orienteering in the UK. Had my two children, who are now 3 and 6. They became a lot more interested in what was happening in younger children, how much physical activity they were getting. And then I was on the Sport England Physical Literacy Consensus Statement working group, which was 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago now. But that was an exploration in England to try and come to a consensus on what the definition of physical literacy is. And in the easiest way I can explain it, I like to use balls. So I use parachute and 4 different coloured balls when I'm explaining it to children or to teachers. Physical literacy is basically a way of learning through movement that goes beyond just the physical ball. So it's about the cognitive ball. It's about what's happening in the brain, how we're learning, how we're thinking, how we're gaining knowledge as we do more movement opportunities. Then there's the affective ball, how they're feeling, their emotions, what joy and fun they're showing on their faces while they're partaking in the movement opportunities. So we've got the physical, the cognitive, the affective, and then the last one, which is the social, which is how they're interacting, collaborating, building relationships while they're partaking in movement opportunities. And in the England definition, all these 4 balls are equal. So there's a few definitions of physical literacy knocking about. So I'm also early years lead for the International Physical Literacy Association, who traditionally use the Whiteheadian definition of motivation and competence through movement, etc. But the England definition incorporates social. Some definitions in some countries don't include the social ball, but the England one that I use in my research and I talk about a lot is the 4 balls of equal weighting. And so it's getting us just to think about physical and movement and sport outside of just that physical and movement skills and all those other important domains of learning and development.
Is there some kind of catalyst that led you into physical literacy and your PhD, because you were at British Orienteering, right?
Yeah, so
On the senior management team.
it
Was
was
there some kind of catalyst that led you to it?
it was always perhaps not explicit. We were always, when we worked to develop the sport and get people more involved in sport, it was always about the positive first experience, getting people having fun and engaged before, try and turning them into elite sports people or volunteers. So it was always like implicit within my work, but never had a term. So when I met kind of all these people in the Sport England consensus statement work, I started thinking, this is really interesting. And then obviously I had a 1-year-old post-COVID. So I'm kind of an ex-runner, thought I was really sporty, working in sport. But then I had this 1-year-old. What do I do with it? What physical development milestones are they meant to be achieving? They're not going into education because it's COVID. I'm at home with this child. And so it was just me going on Google and trying to understand more about the world of physical development, skill development, and then becoming just gobsmacked and horrified at the current stats that there are in our children not being active enough, our children not developing their motor skills enough, our children not enjoying physical activity enough. So, that is essentially why I left a proper job and am now, in the final year of a PhD, because there's this little have you ever heard of the term practitioners, where there's a gap between what the theorists are saying? So people in academia saying physical literacy, here's a lovely concept, here's what it means. And then the practitioners going, okay, that's fine, but what does it mean to me? How does it change my delivery? What does that mean? So my PhD was always driven by the want to be that bridge. So you can imagine Natalie as a nice bridge, lying down as a bridge between the two. Okay, this is the theory, that's fine. But what does it mean to interventions? What does that mean about what we're doing, delivering and inspiring our teachers or sports coaches to change their thinking? So I kind of use it as my eyes were opened, and I want everyone else to kind of get these new physical literacy glasses that hopefully will open their eyes about those other domains and the importance. And I think it's particularly important in those early years. And I can tell you a bit more about my research later on if it's relevant.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to bring Ben and Nathan into this in a moment, because your story resonates with me, because I went through a similar experience, I think, with my own kids. Is that I was working in strength and conditioning with the very elite, and then I came out of that career and then was wondering what I was going to do, and then my eldest son was around 2, actually. He was about 18 months, 2, had a similar kind of experience. And I obviously knew about physical literacy and was a huge fan of it. And then interested to see how those elements of physical literacy were going to be implemented in my kids' sessions. So he would go to soccer, he would go to football, and he would go to gymnastics when he was 1.5, 2, right? I wanted to see the pathway of what that kind of was going to look like in terms of physical literacy, and I didn't really get it. I didn't really, it wasn't, I don't think the people delivering the sessions really got it either. I think what happened was took him to a football session, and it was very much built around what should be a late specialization sport, and let's teach them football because that's what we do as a culture. And I didn't really want to do that. So it's fascinating that you went down the academic route and is now producing this information and the well-needed research into this, so we can all change our programs to including physical literacy.
Firstly, Kirk, I'm very impressed if you were sending your child at 1.5 already to gymnastics and football and swimming. He must have been a very competent little one. But joking aside, yeah, it is that sometimes it takes you having children or being thrown into the deep end of new things and then wanting to learn more about it. I mean, in particular, my research, because it does have a focus at the moment on 3 to 5 year olds, and there's not much research out there that helps us explore and understand the relationships between the domains. So when we kind of maybe research physical activity, we often relate it to health outcomes or educational outcomes or self-regulation or emotional and social outcomes. But what I was really interested in was the relationship between those four physical literacy balls, how they related to each other, were the strength of relationship strong. By that I mean, if you develop one ball, the other balls will develop. So we know that more physical activity should equal better motor competence, better physical competence, etc. But what my research is starting to show us is that the strength of the correlations between the four balls are really high for younger children. And interestingly, the 5-year-olds, they start to disperse a bit. So by that I mean, if you've got 3 or 4-year-olds, it didn't matter if my 4-year-olds were in a nursery setting or whether they were in the reception class of a primary school. It didn't matter. Those 4-year-olds were still significantly lower in total physical literacy than the 5-year-olds, and the correlations between the balls were weaker at age 5. So what that tells us is that as a child is developing and getting older, they're obviously getting more movement experiences and physical activity experiences, but then the domains are starting to develop. That's when they start to move away and develop separately, which is especially important in girls because the effect of the enjoyment and motivation. So what it's telling us is that those balls won't predict the other. Where at the younger age group, they will. So we need to keep those balls interrelated and correlated for as much as we can, so that other things don't overpower those interrelations, if that makes sense. So when a young girl gets older, it doesn't matter how competent they might be. If they're not confident or not having fun, they won't do it. So we need to try and keep that joy and those other balls, and we need to try and keep them as high. And I think that's where that education piece comes in that you mentioned, Kirk, about educators maybe not understanding what it means to have a physical literacy informed approach or what that might look like in practice. But we've got to almost like raise those balls up, not just for the early years, but as the children get older into the key stage 1 and key stage 2, so that all that focus of sessions, whether it's structured sports sessions like the ones you mentioned, gymnastics, or whether it's just play, the outcomes aren't always fixated on getting them to kick a ball into a goal, because obviously motor skills are important, but actually if you've finished a session and they've all had so much fun, even if they've put the ball up their top, farted on the balls, been running around screaming with the balls, coaches will go, I've lost control. But be comfortable with that chaos, because look at the fun they're having, look at the positive experience they're having. So I love that kind of phrase, be comfortable with chaos, and embrace that as educators or sports coaches.
Good opportunity. Ben, are your sessions at mini athletics comfortable with chaos?
Yeah, I would say that's a very good way to explain it in a lot of cases. But I think the thing that, if I rewind it a little bit back to my early introduction to mini athletics and how I discovered mini athletics, because I think your explanation, Natalie, about children having to enjoy what they're doing to develop these balls, like the movement, the cognition, the social aspects. I think my daughter Amelia, who is now 6, is a classic example of this. And reasons have come to light as to why that is now, I think, a little bit. So we basically stumbled across mini athletics a couple of years ago now at the National Running Show in Birmingham, where mini athletics were doing taster sessions. And me and my wife, big runners, needed some opportunity for her to burn off some steam, and mini athletics so happened to be there, and we took her along to the taster session. Little did we know we wasn't going to get to do much shopping, because she wouldn't leave the mini athletics session whilst we were there. She was just so engrossed with what was on offer. And I think this comes from the fact that her prior experience of sport was a dance class, a baby ballet class, I think it was. And it was very much, you need to sit down. Now, this is great because some children love to explore dance and movement, but Amelia doesn't like to sit down. And that zaps all the fun away from her when she has to be told to sit down. And when we took her to this mini athletics taster, she was allowed to join in with this organised chaos, if we call it that. We're using coloured cones. We're using big cones to match the small cones to the big cones. She's getting to pretend, I think it was post people, if I'm not mistaken, Kurt, when we did that.
Yes.
So it was running from one end of the space that we had to the other to match the red cone with the big red cone, but diving on the floor when the dog barks, which I think was, obviously was one of the coaches, and she would dive on the floor and roll around and probably did the farting on the cone that you talked about, Natalie, there. All of that was in that taster session, and she was just in a moment, and she absolutely loved it. And fast forward a little bit now, and I'm sorry I'm rambling a little bit, but it's something I'm really passionate about. Fast forward a bit now, she's 6 years old, and she's got PE at school. We're calling it PE, but it's not PE because they've taken her 1 hour away of PE to practice dance for the school play, which is in the summer, and it's Disney themed. Now, she loves Disney. We're going in July, but she doesn't like dancing. And she knows that this is coming on a Wednesday. And last Wednesday, we had an absolutely terrible time at getting her to school because she knows that she's going to be put on the spot and not do the things that she likes to do because she doesn't like being put on the spot and told to dance and almost be choreographed. She wants that chaos, that running around, and the social aspect that you've caught as one of the balls. So I think it's so important. Long answer, yes, mini athletics can sometimes represent chaos, but it's organised chaos. And the main thing is children are playing, but all of that is underpinned by developing and exploring the athletic movements and letting children express themselves to the way they need to be.
That's the conflict you've got, Ben, in an education environment, because if you've got I assume your little one's in what, year one?
She's year 2 now.
Year 2, okay. So you've got a teacher delivering PE. They're all outside. If someone looked in and saw that huge amount of chaos, then they'll be like, oh, that teacher's not got those kids under control. What's happening there? Therefore, there's this innate pressure in education for PE to be that kind of structured play, physical development outcome. And I think that's where you've got, in this space, we've got that conflict between the play, the play people that are all about, we need more play sufficiency, we need more opportunities to play, free play, unstructured play. And then you've got the structured, the people that are, delivering interventions that might be 8 weeks of fundamental movement skill development. But then they shouldn't be fighting against each other because we know that children need both of those things. So obviously your little one doesn't enjoy dance, and that seems to be one about the dance, but 2 about the autonomy she's got within that dance. So she's being told what to do. Maybe it's a choreographed piece, and they've got no choice, have they? There's no freedom of choice in what they do. So I don't know in any of your mini athletic sessions, you're not always, I assume, going to be setting up a structured thing and telling them what to do. Is there a bit of autonomy and choice?
Absolutely. There's obviously a general theme for the week, but we are asking children to move from one side of the room to the other, essentially, to complete a task. Now, whether they do that sliding on their knees, crawling, running, jumping, twirling around, they get to do that, right? And that's that thing about Kirk. Obviously, you may have heard the story, listeners, about Kirk's vision in mini athletics, the Bluey episode where they are tied in the playroom. And Dad's watching them move in all the different ways that they want to move. And this, I think, is hopefully, Kirk, your vision playing out in mini athletics is that the children are doing what they want to do and they're moving in the way they want. So that autonomy is there. They get to explore. And that's the great thing about it. And that's why children need to be able to play. It's an interesting point you said about someone looking through the window and needing to see that structure, but are the children really enjoying themselves in that moment?
Yeah.
It's a good point to bring in Nathan here as well, because Nathan's probably the most physically literate of the Did you, Nathan, know about physical literacy as a professional athlete? And what was your experience as a kid of that?
Didn't really know much about it, not until we're probably looking at about 2016. So I was doing my coaching badges, and the PFA they had that kind of the bubbles up on there to introduce it, but it wasn't, like you said, Natty, there's no bridge in between the two. So you're either told about it and then that's kind of it, and then the next step, there was nothing in between really. So they're obviously, it might have changed a lot now over the years, which is great to see. Just to touch on with Ben, recently with the chaos thing, I see parents on the sides at the classes, and they get a little bit worked up because I'm giving a guidance. I'm going to the lesson plan. I'm giving them a guidance of, this is the theme this week. This is what we're going to go around this track here. Keep going around that track. Don't, because you don't want to go backwards, you don't want to bump heads and all that stuff. And we stick to the theme, and it's great. The kids are having a great time. But there is the parents, like, they will see their child do something different, and it's like, they'll be like, no, you're not meant to do that. And I'm like, it's okay. Don't worry. They're having fun. And that's what drew me into this. So to answer your question, Kirk, as well, going a bit off topic there, but, growing up as a kid, I didn't enjoy football when I went to a so-called School of Excellence. So back in the 90s, it was School of Excellence, not an academy. So it was very structured. This is how you got to play. And I was very much a freedom player. I wanted to enjoy football. I loved football. I wanted to enjoy it. And it was just too structured at some, like, going that next step up. I actually really enjoyed my football when I was just playing grassroots level, playing with my mates, scoring lots of goals, having fun, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, didn't really learn about, physical literacy as much throughout my playing career, but coming away and, joining the franchise of Mini Athletics, it's been an eye-opener, and it's ticked all the boxes that I've always wanted to do in coaching. Hence why I didn't want to go into coaching with football, because it was just there's too many kids out there, too much pressure from parents on the kids to succeed. And I didn't want to be involved in that environment. So I just want children to enjoy learning different types of sports, different types of movement, should I say, and just have fun doing it, because you're forever an adult. And, you get to like 15, 16 years of age, at least they can look back on something and say, I remember that. I went to there and had fun.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So that's a good opportunity now to ask you, Natalie, about school and nursery and daycares and so on. Because in most things in schools and education settings, there's an assessment. What is your view of assessing where a child is in terms of physical literacy?
Yeah, well, I think there's two parts of your question there, Kirk. The first part, for those that maybe don't know much about the early years foundation stage, because obviously that's the curriculum that's followed for children aged 5 and below, and that includes reception age of the primary school. And that doesn't have PE in the curriculum. So obviously when you get to Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, there's PE in the curriculum, defined amounts. But in the early years foundation stage, no two settings could be delivering the same thing. So you might have a private nursery, or you might have a preschool that's attached to a primary school that are following different, movement or physical activity, I guess, what they're doing. So they might be doing Jumpstart Johnny, one might be doing Dance Mum, one might be doing structured 1 hour sessions. But because of that, it's very hard, because there's actually no set, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, because in the good case, there's some early years settings that are doing absolutely brilliant stuff, integrating physical activity in the daily life. Because on one thing, I think it's an advantage, because then you haven't got putting physical activity in a box. So I really dislike putting movement and physical activity and physical development in the PE box. I think that physical activity and physical literacy is an overarching concept. And I think any stage of education, whether it's early years or Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2, then it's so important that that movement is intertwined throughout the day. So brain breaks, movement opportunities, chances to move. And when I did my research into those settings, I used accelerometers on the little ones to try and understand what percentage of the time whilst they were at education they were being sedentary. So we're talking about 60-70% of the amount of time. So they could be in an earlier setting all day, half a day, 60-70% of the time being sedentary, and not much time being moderately to vigorously active. So they're doing quite a lot of light activity, but it's still not enough. They're still being sedentary far too little. And the bad thing is that gets worse as the older the children get. So the more they get into education, the more sedentary they're going to be. So I don't know how, I haven't done the research on the older ages, but I forget what the second part of your point was now. I've talked a bit about the early years, but I can't remember what the...
So the question was the assessment of physical...
Assessment. Oh, yeah. Okay. So in early years, children are assessed with early learning goals.
Yes.
So there's physical development questions, and they're questions to do with gross and fine motors. And the government then obviously spits out these lovely statistics. And if we were to look at them, it would tell us that our early years children, physical development scores amongst the highest in the early learning goals. But things like handwriting scores the lowest. That does not make any sense, because we know that physical activity, physical development and handwriting are interlinked. So that current methodology of assessment is painting a very rosy picture in what isn't a rosy situation. So I think that current methodology in the early years, obviously it's got good points as well, but I think currently that's just painting an incorrect picture when research in the field tells us completely otherwise. The ridiculous amount of percentage of children aren't motor competent enough. So I think as that currently stands, that's not fit for purpose. It's not giving us the picture. Secondly, in terms of assessment, we do not know enough about young children's movement patterns. There's not enough data. Even the World Health Organization doesn't have kind of recommended ways of measuring physical activity in under fives. It's really hard, but it's such an important age group to understand better. So, the assessment that I used in my research, I used kind of an assessment of physical literacy, which is a very simple wheel which asks questions on the 4 domains. So there's 3 questions on each, and that's kind of a RAG rating approach. So that's a very simple way, and that was just to understand physical literacy. It's not testing motor competence. There's motor screening programs that can give more detail. So AFP have got a really good early years motor screening program, and that will enable you to drill down in kind of locomotor stability skills where they are. But certainly I think the overall physical development assessment early learning goals in the early years is certainly not, it's doing it a disservice, because it's not then giving physical development and physical activity enough focus, because everyone's going, okay, well, physical development is the highest. We don't need to be thinking or working at that much. And unless we change what we're looking at and how we're looking at those things, then policy and senior leadership teams aren't going to sit up and take notice.
No.
So we certainly need something that is going to help that messaging.
So you mentioned that you had some questions there in terms of your assessment. Can you give an example of those?
Oh, the questions that are in the physical literacy wheel?
Yeah.
So in this case, because we're talking about very young children who aren't necessarily able to answer questions themselves, because if you work with young children, you know that they would give you the incorrect answer. So Anna would go outside and you'd ask her what temperature it would be, and she'd be like, yeah, it's 100 degrees. So actually their ability to tell us, they'd go, yeah, I can do anything, I'm really competent, I score 5. They'd score the highest themselves, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So therefore, in this case, educators had to rate between 1 and 5. So in the physical, there were questions on movement skills and competence, and there were statements which would be what a child scoring 1 would look like, what a child scoring 5 would look like. So I don't know, in the social, I think 1 was social skills, and there was collaboration, and there was relationships. So the collaboration might be, if they scored 1, they kind of regularly worked independently, didn't talk or communicate with others during movement skills, etc. And to score 5, they would frequently work with others, collaborate, problem solve, blah, blah, blah. So it was just kind of a way of being able to kind of benchmark if you had a group and 1 was the highest, 1 was the lowest, let's benchmark and RAG rate the rest of them. And what that would do would kind of enable us to then understand, the relationships between them and what they were. So, for example, I know that educators have scored the children in my sample as higher in social and cognitive. So what that is telling us is that the educators perceive the girls as more likely to be social and collaborative whilst taking part in movement, and perceiving the boys as being more about doing tasks and stuff on their own, which is really interesting because it probably aligns with assumptions that we make about young people anyway. But also, there was no difference in physical. So this is obviously just in my cohort of 203 children, which again, what I mentioned earlier about the importance of that age when the differences aren't there yet, and the differences will start to appear as they get older when the domains start drifting apart from each other. So yeah, I find all the data stuff really interesting, and obviously once it's shared more, I can send and share more over if that's of interest. I'm sure you'll have a bit of physical literacy research, Kirk.
Yeah. Yes, I am.
I'm enjoying this as well. Got some questions, but I know, Ben, you've got a question, haven't you? So
It was just kind of on that research that you mentioned your cohort. There was it 230, you said?
203, so across 10 settings. They were all in Derbyshire. 7 of them were in areas of kind of the worst areas of deprivation.
Yeah.
Some of them were private nurseries, some of them are preschools, and then some of them are reception classes. And then we had an equal split of girls and boys. We had some SEND, we had some, we had about 16 different ethnicity codes within that cohort. PPR, English as an additional language, and SEND we're also now starting to look at to see if there are any differences in kind of those within our participant sample.
Because my question was about SEND, because I think it's really important to understand, obviously, within the 4 balls that you're talking about, one of those is caught my attention is the social aspect, because I think the reason why my daughter struggles with like the dance side, the spotlight side, the being centre of attention side is the social aspect. So me and my wife Rachel, we've both recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and I think it's something like there's an 80% chance that if you have a neurodivergent parent, that your child will display symptoms of neurodivergency. So we're working quite closely with the school. Her teacher, I believe, is the new Senko, which is great for us, but she displays a lot of symptoms of things like social anxiety, and absolutely loves her sports, by the way. Like, she does mini athletics now, and I told you the story about her finding mini athletics. She loves gymnastics, where it's an unstructured kind of session. She just goes around the balance beams. She absolutely loves bouldering. I know Nathan's kids are getting into that as well, because she gets the ability to express herself. But in children with is there a particular, because obviously the balls that you talk about, the movement, the cognitive, social, they don't all develop at the same time, right? But they all have equal sort of, they should be focused on equally. Is there something that can be done to say, well, this child with SEND really struggles socially, so we should prioritise that? How does that come into the
exactly. So obviously you mentioned, obviously they have equal weighting, but like you say, a 3-year-old's knowledge and comprehension is going to be different to a 5 or 6-year-old's comprehension. But, those questions can be applicable to whatever age group. So in terms of, if you're talking about a 3-year-old, it would still be their ability to maybe follow rules, instructions, so they can still, there is still that obviously I've got a 3-year-old, so most of the time she doesn't follow rules, but there is an ability to follow as rules. I've had to put the peanut butter jar really high up in the cupboard, because honestly, otherwise the peanut butter jar, it doesn't matter how many times I stipulate that is a rule, do not just eat the peanut butter. But anyway,
peanut butter is not that,
But yeah, to answer your question, as Kirk said right at the start, PhD was always about an intervention approach. So what we're going to do is create profiles. So an SEND child might be higher in this, lower in this, however their scores equate. And then the idea is then, okay, what interventions are going to best support and develop? So it doesn't matter whether it's an SEND child, a child with a neurodiverse condition, or just a boy without, all children will score maybe differently and higher in this and lower in this. So it's about then saying, okay, those children are going to benefit from a more structured, maybe motor skill intervention. Those children maybe benefit from environments in small groups, 2 or 3 people, so they can build their confidence and have support in sort of environments. This group may enjoy or benefit from work, and they're perfectly happy in larger groups, but they might need more this, that, and the other. So yes, that's exactly the purpose, that we can then come out with that kind of approach and say, right, okay, these are the profiles. And it may be that, like you said, SEND or those with neurodiverse conditions might fit into a certain profile. So there's, this is not official researchy terms, but obviously you've got children that I call like the mad ass fly children's. You know, the ones that are like always running around, always the first to choose to do things, but they are falling over all the time, running into each other. You know, those kind of, but they're so keen and they're brilliant. They're going to need different kind of perhaps support than the child who's the opposite and is maybe competent but is not engaged, is always sitting there picking at the grass. You know, so it is very important that we understand the needs of individuals, maybe like your daughter, etc., but also that we're able to make it simple for a practitioner to understand that maybe there are profiles that these children fit into, so that every time we turn to an intervention, it's not always the first port of call to be, right, okay, physical skills, physical skills, physical skills. Because as I say, whilst they're important, what we do know is that if those balls are so strongly correlated, then we can be confident that working on those others, you know, in those age groups is going to be hugely beneficial for the other ones anyway. So it's a good point you make, and it's really relevant to the intervention approach.
Can I just jump in there, actually? Because I know, Nathan, you've got a question, but this kind of leads into your area as well. We're talking about physical competency of kids, but what about adults? Because, and if you look at some of your teams as well that you might have worked in, Nathan, and looking at those different balls, as Natalie so eloquently explained it.
So how many footballers do we know, Kirk? I don't know,
Yeah.
probably doesn't include you, Nathan, that will quit their football career or finish their football career and then get really overweight and not partake in any physical activity because it was a job. It was a job. And, you know, those people, whilst they were probably brilliant and absolutely physically competent at that time, physical literacy is like a graph. So one of the things we do with people sometimes is ask, you know, adults, is to ask them to map their physical literacy. So I know, so if you took your 4 balls and you asked me to map, you know, a graph across my ages when I was younger, when I had my children, so the physical bit would go down here, wouldn't it? Because when I had my children, it was impossible to run for 4 months after or whatever. So, you know, down. One of my other domains was going up then because I was reading more about what I could do after I'd had a child. I was reading more about different alternative things I could do aside from running. So I started going on the spin bike. I started doing some other things. So actually, my knowledge of that bit, my motivation was going up because I wanted it. So do you know what I mean? Your relationship with those 4 areas is going to change over your life course, as we know our relationship with physical activity does. But, you know, I would argue that children are going to be more physically literate than us. Because if you ask an adult, here's a ball, give them a ball, what are they going to, and do some things with the ball, they're going to most likely do sport-specific skills. They might bounce the ball like a basketball, or they might throw it in a hoop, or they'll throw it, do you know what I mean? Or they'll bounce it between their legs. You ask a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old to do things with a ball, just ask them. It's fun. It's funny. The amount of things they'll come up with where an adult will be like, oh, no, we can't do that. So actually, it's a really...
By the way, that's so interesting because that's how we created a lot of the mini athletics games. We would give our own kids certain equipment and just look at their creativity with that equipment, and a lot of it did come from them.
Yeah, so I guess the question on adults is hugely important as well, because physical literacy development is throughout life. It's not just, you know, about what we're doing with the little ones, but it's about how we can inspire and we can keep or try and encourage or motivate older people as well to and the principles are the same.
It's made me laugh that, because as soon as you said that about giving a child a ball, my 5-year-old, he thinks he's Sonic the Hedgehog. So
I do know what, Nathan? I think you think he's Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
You don't know how many times he said he's Sonic the Hedgehog. I think you want him to be Sonic the Hedgehog.
No,
He's going to come on to the next podcast painted blue, I can tell it. I see it.
World Book Day.
Yeah.
No, it just like makes me laugh because the other day he just makes up these things and it's beautiful to see. You know, he could have a football in his hands or at his feet, and he will say, "I'm going to do a dolphin kick." I'm like, okay, all right, don't know what that is, but he just makes the stuff, and it's beautiful to see.
Yeah.
And that is with a lot of children. With our littles and minis, we're given the javelins to start off with, like these foam javelins. And I tell the kids, like, right, practice throwing your javelins with, the way that I've taught you, or, look at someone else and while I'm setting up. And I look around, it's chaos. I've got a group of kids who have thrown it against the wall, watching it bounce back off the wall and trying to catch it. And they're making up some name for it. I've got another group just running around, not holding it right, but just thinking, oh, it's a crane, it's a claw. It's beautiful to see. And I'm giggling and laughing at it. And it's beautiful to see that expression and just the way that children are. So it's definitely something. I did have a question about the whole development thing, but it's flown out my head.
If it comes back, you can,
Yeah, I'll come back to it. But it's interesting about Ben saying about the Senko, and that's so interesting and so important, because there are so many children out there, and you can see it in certain classes as well, and you cater to that, and you kind of pick it up very quickly to say, okay, right, I know what this. I have a child who loves tidying up and has to help out, set up and everything. And it's beautiful to see. And he's engaged and he enjoys the rest of the class. Because if I said to him, no, don't do that, what, you can't tidy that up, that's me, or what, you can't set that up. He has to come around and set up with me. And I'm like, that's brilliant. I'm happy for you to do it, because I know you're coming in here and you're going to walk away from here enjoying the class because you've done that small, simple thing. Whereas if it was a certain football club, I know he wouldn't get that. And that's frustrating to see, because there's coaches out there in certain, not just football, but in certain sports that just can't put all that. And that's where this physical literacy.
Well, it's hard, isn't it, Nathan? Because it's that what we mentioned earlier about the chaos thing, and you have to need to be in control, which is especially in sports coaching generally. It's kind of the ethos, isn't it? They're in control. We tell them what to do. They get better. They become elite sports people. But not everyone is going to become an elite sports person. But all of those people are going to become our next government or some of those people are going to become our next government in 30 years or whatever. We want them to be happy and healthy, irrespective of whether we're developing them to be elite sports people. So, like I said about the unstructured and structured, these two things shouldn't be in conflict with each other. They should work together. Even in some of the sport development basics, we learn about the pyramid, don't we? Where the more people you get here at the bottom, the more likely you are to get at the top. But it's the conflict against things like risky play and that being in control, which is really hard, especially the risky play thing. So, for example, parents and even my own husband, I'm always asking him, as politely as I can, not to constantly say, be careful to the girls. Like when they're, climbing over the tunnel, instead of going through the tunnel at a play park, Anna tends to like to climb on top of it, and it's just human nature to say, be careful. But actually, if you imagine a child, so whether they're doing very simple functional movements like tipping water from a jug, right? So, and then the adult says, oh, be careful, don't spill it. What's going to happen? They go, huh? And then they spill it. Because it's literally, young children are concentrating so hard, they can't. So actually shouting, be careful, or not giving that opportunity to discover their own body spatial awareness. Obviously, I know we don't want children to hurt themselves. Of course we don't. But I think society has changed in that we're just slightly less, we're more risk averse, aren't we? We're less supportive, and children need that to develop their confidence and spatial awareness and proprioception and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important that we support as well that messaging. So obviously in your role as delivering beautiful chaos-filled sessions to the little ones, how are we then also talking to the parents and the children and hopefully trying to encourage that messaging with the parents as well, so that they're outside of mini athletic sessions or any sessions, that environments and parents feel comfortable and understand why we need to try and get our little ones having more positive movement experiences.
Yeah, sorry, that's That's the challenge, actually, and that's why the research that you do and your colleagues is so important to what we're doing out in the field, because we need to relate back to why we're doing what we're doing and why that's backed by research. Because I remember a conversation when we were developing mini athletics. It was a health and safety expert or something, hadn't even looked at the classes. And I was explaining what we were doing. We were going to be dinosaurs, and it was all about these building. I didn't actually use the word physical skills at that point. I said it was play-based learning. And he said, well, I don't get it. I don't see the point. I mean, I take my daughters to swimming because they're going to learn something, and I want to see them learning something. And then I thought, okay, that's interesting, because if a parent comes to a mini athletics class, the learning is going to be so disguised in this imaginative format. Are they going to see the actual benefits that we are doing, but they're not going to be able to see it?
Because they're thinking about the physical, aren't they? They want to see their child can now do the hurdles successfully.
Yeah, that's right, because that's the culture. Exactly right. So that's why the research you're doing is so important to us, because we have to relate that back to the parents. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
And education is key in all of this, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've always tried to do, Natalie, with this podcast is to give people, parents, listeners, the information needed to be able to support their children. And I think this is probably, out of the episodes that we recorded so far, probably the one that they need to listen to the most, because it gives them the opportunity to really learn about what children should be picking up in the 4 pillars of movement and sport and enjoying, the children being active. So I'm very aware of my daughter's school not giving her the activity levels that she requires to meet the 4 pillars of physical literacy. So I've been making sure after school, like the other day we went out, we took a beanbag, she threw it, ran after it, I threw it, we ran after it, and we just had fun outside for 20, 30 minutes. And then this morning before school we played another little game which we've created. Is this the sort of thing that I should be doing, what parents should be doing, is encouraging their children
that is
to
absolutely
play,
brilliant, and that's
colour
very
match?
much showing off, because my battle is just getting them up and to school in the morning. So well done.
There's an Instagram reel about it. I just wanted to send people to watch it, but another one's coming out later.
Yeah, but joking aside though, Ben, there's that almost within, I would say, early years and primary school, there's that accountability. So in other words, parents are going, they were getting all the movement they need at school and in gymnastics or whatever, or going to the park, because not everything has to be cost activities, low cost, no cost stuff that children are doing as well. So parents might be saying, the children are getting enough physical activity. The teachers will go, well, they'll be getting, they should be getting some with the parents. So there's that kind of accountability thing. But what we know is that in education, they're not getting enough. And then you couple that with society changing. And what I really dislike in some narrative is when they say, we're not letting our children go 10 miles down the road on their own anymore. They're not safe to go. Our society and the green spaces, we cannot go back. We cannot change what there is. But what we can do is better respond to what we're seeing in this moment. So in this moment, we're seeing that education is not providing sufficient movement opportunities. That's not the case for all. I didn't mean to tar everybody with the same brush, but let's make that assumption. So therefore, that family environment, that role model, and the fact that we are fighting against other issues that we hear about regularly, like screen time. I was at a conference recently that there was a country that there was a countrywide research study, and it was 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds on average 5 to 6 hours of screen time. So basically I was like, how is that happening? They're literally getting home from school and they're, on their screen. Now, screen time is not the enemy. Sedentariness is the enemy. So as parents, I guess the advice that you probably heard already today is that we get a little bit more comfortable with chaos. Don't worry if your best cushions are being used as an obstacle course out in the garden. Just relax. It's fine. And also say be careful, try and just limit the amount of time just saying be careful. But thirdly, really think and reflect about how much free play, fun play, and choices they're getting in play that you can provide, and what maybe we're not talking about people doing massive changes, but if they can consciously make one different change. So, for example, one change I made is I'm trying to have no screen time during the week. So that period of time between I pick them up, I'm lucky enough to be able to work flexibly so I can pick them up. But that period between 3:30 and 5:30, that's the pain point. That's the point where parents might have to be doing a bit more work. So therefore, I'm just going to put a movie on or let them play on the tablet so I can get 2 more hours of work. But we need to consciously. I don't care if it's 1 day a week. I don't care if it's for 20 minutes. But just what can we do? Because it's so important that we're taking accountability. For me personally, I don't really mind when my 6-year-old learns to read. She's starting to learn to read. It's all going lovely. But what I want to hear about is how much play she's having, how much fun she's having. That's not the case for all parents. Some are going to be more academically inclined. But I think you're absolutely right, Ben. We can all maybe make one little slight change that will help and give more fun and movement opportunities to that child. It's also like a trickle effect. Talk to someone else about it. Your child's other parent that maybe you've seen isn't quite as, and it's that drip of messaging. What can we all do as individuals to help and just try and do what we can, I guess.
I laugh about the screen time thing, but just a little sweet point about, I'm going to, joking aside, go back to the Instagram reel that I made the other day when me and Amelia were doing the throwing. There's a section in it right at the start where we were walking down the road, and obviously it was for mini athletics, so I was using this moment to create a bit of talking point about physical literacy, hopefully. I said to her, "You've been sat at your desk all day. Do you get enough exercise at school?" And there's this really sweet point where she just laughed, and it was as if to say, "No, I didn't. I need to do some running around." And we started throwing it, and the screams that she let out as she was running was great. And we did that on the sort of way home from school. But back to the screen time thing, she comes home and she is very insistent, because I think of her undiagnosed ADHD, that she has this comfort in watching Alvin and the Chipmunks. I cannot stand that chipmunk, but
Lennox is the same.
No, it's terrible because I have noise sensitivity and I can't deal with the screeching voice of the chipmunk. But anyway, I let her watch that when she gets home from work, because I do have to do work, but sometimes. But in my defense, she doesn't sit down and watch it. We bought her this gym equipment, colourful blocks, stepping stones with lights, beams. She's now got to the point where she's doing an obstacle course around the living room, climbing up onto the toy box, the ottoman, to get as high as she can in the living room, to then jump off. And I am that person that says, be careful, be careful. So if I've taken anything away from this podcast, which has been an absolutely fantastic discussion, is I'm no longer going to be saying to her, be careful, you can jump off stuff, and just express yourself and enjoy what you're doing, because that's what we need these children to be doing, right?
Like we said, it's nothing, okay, obviously your personal preference aside, there's nothing wrong with her watching Alvin and the Chipmunks, but there's a couple of really easy things you can do.
There's so much wrong with it.
If they're going to be watching a screen, put it up, put it on a shelf, so at least the child, like you said, moving or fidgeting a bit and not sat down all the time.
Well, if you're my son, he likes to get on the unit, because our TV's on the wall. He'll get on the unit and stand right in front of it. And he's been told by his opticians to say, look, you can't do that. So I always say to him, look, you can't do that. Your opticians have said, like, come away from the screen.
But Nathan, another tip is audio over visual. So if you've got an Alexa or whatever else, and try, if they need stuff that's going to engage them, try doing things that are audio, not visual. Because the problem is, as soon as you introduce a screen, it's like, especially with the young ones, it's like, oh, I can't detach myself from it. It's so colourful. So if you can maybe do audio, because you can even if you play YouTube stuff, but it's just audio. Okay. You know what I mean? So try doing the audio, but not the visual as well, so they can't actually be seeing and glued to that. So that's...
Our house is just chaotic. Like, when he comes home from school, I mean, our youngest, he's at nursery till 6 o'clock anyway. So, but me and my wife obviously working from home, it's very easy just to say, let's go and entertain yourself. To be fair to him, he does a lot of drawing, So we'll give him Sonic the Hedgehog. Here we go, Sonic again, colouring book. And then he will, he'll have Alvin and the Chipmunks. I can't stand it, but he'll have it on in the background. But he's colouring in, and then he's building. He's got these block things. He's building stuff. So he's watching it, but he's not watching it. It's kind of in the background. But the weather's getting better, and I thought to myself, we really need to get him outside and stuff, and just chuck him out in the garden, just cause havoc.
But I'm also curious, Nathan. Obviously, if your little one is there till 6 o'clock, they're there for a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
What conversations do you have with that nursery about how much physical activity they might be getting or movement they might be getting? And us as parents, we can ask those questions. Don't be afraid to be that annoying parent that's like, oh, how much?
I'm trying to get into the nursery. So.
Yeah. We combated that in Birmingham. We do mini athletics in our daughter's nursery for that very reason. We managed to get
it. And the only other thing I wanted to mention before I forget, Ben, was that you talk about you say exercise a lot, but obviously children, that's a turn off for both adults and children. So one of the things I found in some research is that terminology matters.
Should we go and play?
Yeah, play or movement, or even just activity is better than exercise, because then in the parents they automatically then start thinking exercise is sport equals structured stuff equals law. You know what I mean? So it's just for parents as well, when they talk to a child, you can already have associations at age 5 and 6. So my little one already comes home and say, no, the girls don't like football, do they? It's only boys that do it. I say, why do you say that? And then obviously I have to try and be patient and try and, oh no, that's probably just your class, I said. That's probably just maybe there's more boys in your class, but girls can be, very good at it too. You've been to see Derby County ladies football team, you've seen them. So, stereotypes are already, and gender stereotypes specifically, can already be starting at those ages. So terminology we use, trying to stop those stereotypes or, answer back to them is obviously equally important as well, to try and make sure that
Great point. I want my daughter to be a runner, so I'm going to pick her up from school and ask if she wants to play the game of running 5 miles around the block with me. We won't do that. Look, this is an absolutely fantastic subject, and I think what we need to do, because he is so passionate, and I think you've turned us into passionate people about it as well, Natalie. I think we need to hand over to Kirk
to have
the final thought. Get the final thought from Kirk about this discussion, because I know he's very passionate about it. Kirk, come on.
Yeah, passionate. And we almost got to the end of the podcast without mentioning the 2 dreaded words, which were Derby County.
Sorry, I had to get it in there.
It was so close to being perfect. But yeah, it's so fantastic to have you on. It's not a coincidence that this is our longest podcast we've ever done.
I apologise.
And yeah, thank you so much. For those of you that want to follow Natalie, are you on Instagram, Natalie?
If you have made it to this far in the podcast, then yes, you are welcome to follow me. I'm on LinkedIn, is the social media platform.
So follow Natalie on LinkedIn. Follow me on Instagram. There we go. This is a self-promoting, because I am so passionate about physical literacy. I'm just starting my Instagram. Never really been on Instagram before, but I'm just saying so passionate about physical literacy at home that I've started my own Instagram now on that subject. So,
and there's even videos of you playing balloon tennis in the office.
I know, there is. And we're actually going to go for a run with some balloons today. So we'll see how that works. But yeah, thank you, Natalie. We're so grateful for having you on.
You're welcome anytime, and keep up the good mini athletics work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Natalie.